Uh, hey, Matt, can you hear me?
Hey, Mike, I can.
Yeah, great.
How's it going? You're kicking it off, man.
Yeah, going great. Yeah. So Matt's going to talk to us about. You've convinced me we have to collaborate, but how the hell do we do that with people? How do we deal with people? Huh?
Yeah, I mean that's sort of the thing. That's what everybody wants to know, right? Like at the end of the day, it's people, and we talk a lot about theory, but how do we actually do these things that we keep talking about? So hopefully we'll talk about that a little bit.
I'll let you take it off. Let me share the screen. Let me pop the screen in here real quick. Let's see. There we go.
There we go. Oh, well, we were for a second.
We were, yeah.
There it is. Okay, fantastic. So yeah, my name is Matt Stratton. I'm here to talk about, you've convinced me we have to collaborate, but how the hell do we deal with people? So just a little bit about myself, not too much. I don't feel like I have to do a big resume slide. Also, I know Corey Quinn is coming up in a couple, and if he's watching this, he would make fun of me for doing this. But that being said, like I said, my name is May Stratton. I'm primarily known in the DevOps industry for liking Diet Coke, I guess. But more relevant, I am a transformation specialist at Red Hat, is where I'm working currently, helping organizations with their digital and DevOps transformation and all that fun stuff. But probably the most important credential I have is this one from Ryan Kitchens at Netflix, who has gone on record to say that I have the best hair out of everybody in developer advocacy. So what more could you ask for in terms of legitimacy? I will say it's very interesting to move into this virtual conference. I've been given a lot of conference talks over the years, and my style, we'll see how well it translates to the online experience. So I appreciate you all being kind of use cases and test cases for this. And Lisa just talked to us all about testing. So, hey, we're testing. We're doing it live. It's probably fine. Fantastic. All right. So here's the thing, right? When we're talking about DevOps, we've been talking about this DevOps thing for a very long time. Some might even say 10 years or maybe more. And at its core, we're always been talking about collaboration. It's in the name. It's dev and ops and security and database and all the other stuff. So we know collaboration is a thing. We hear about it all the time, right? Like, how many talks have you been to that talk about why it's so important that we have to work together? We have to bring down the walls. We hear this all the time. And then we also hear a lot about empathy, right? This is such a key idea. And it's true, right? Like, it makes sense. We understand why it matters. And that's the thing. I'm not here to talk to you. I'm not here to sell you on why it matters. Hopefully you've seen this before. Hopefully, if not, there's 10 years worth of DevOps Days talks that will tell you all about it, all about why empathy matters. But at a certain point, that feels like just so much blah, blah, blah. You're like, I got it. I get it. I'm on board. This super matters. This is the thing I want. We know it's important. That's great. Enough with the theory, because the reality is people muddy everything up, right? I don't know how many of you are working on teams of one in a company of one where you don't have to collaborate. You don't have to work with people. And the thing that you have no control over is everybody else. That's where it gets really, really hard. And when it becomes time to say, like, okay, cool, I want to collaborate. Okay, but people are fighting with me, and people are blaming, and people are arguing. And I feel like I'm always bumping my head against the wall when I'm trying to reach out to these people. And Maddie, you've told me to have empathy. You've told me to see where they're coming from. And I'm trying, man. I am trying so hard. But damn it, these humans, they keep messing it up. So I'm going to take a little bit of time today to talk about some active things that we can do when we have to deal with this, right? When we have to deal with people, because you know what? You just do. In all kinds of ways. Maybe they're people directly on your team. Maybe they're in an ancillary team that you interact with. Maybe they're your customers. whether they're internal or external. Maybe they're people in an open source community that you're collaborating with, that you're building something with together. Maybe it's your family. We're not going to go into that as much, but all these things apply when dealing with other humans who, strangely enough, do not know exactly what we mean all the time. Now, just to hammer the point home, this is backed up with science, right? So we look at the Accelerate State of DevOps report in 2019. And one of the things that was really interesting is in this report, they took things from Project Aristotle, which was research that Google did around psychological safety in teams at Google, and kind of wondered if this applied outside of Google as well. And spoiler alert, or it's not a spoiler if you've been reading this slide, it absolutely does not just apply within there. This was consistent across all of the research, right? So a culture of psychological safety is predictive of software delivery performance, organizational performance, and productivity. So in terms of your organization and your team actually functioning well and being able to deliver value, this matters. It also matters because you kind of don't want your life to suck, but that's sometimes a little harder to prove the point. So thank you, State of DevOps report, for putting some numbers around this so we can talk business with people. Cool. This is important. We get it. Fine. How? How do we do this? And specifically, we're going to talk about a couple different things. We're going to talk about this idea of psychological safety and what we can do to encourage psychological safety in teams. If you've been watching this track, this came up in various talks earlier about why psychological safety mattered. Sue talked about it. We're going to talk a little bit about, and when we think about being in a learning organization, that's also come up in previous talks, having that psychological safety is really key. We've talked a lot about the need to be blame. We talk a lot about blamelessness, right? Okay, cool. That's super hard. But what can we do? We also maybe have talked a lot about what we can do as individuals to help ourselves be more blame aware and blame free. But that's just us. What can we do to help the other people? What can we do? So we're going to talk a little bit about some facilitation tips when you're in a meeting and you're trying to keep things from getting blamey. Some things you can do if you're facilitating a meeting like that. And we're going to talk also about conflict and how you can de-escalate conflict, because that really conflict is a thing that happens because, strangely enough, not everybody agrees with you all the time, sometimes just because they don't have the same information that you do. So when conflict escalates, it can be an impediment to accomplishing everything, or accomplishing anything for that matter. So what are some things we can do, whether it's to de-escalate or to be able to have more productive work when we are in conflict? And hopefully these are things that might be helpful in personal conflict as well, but that's maybe a different conference track. So back to this idea of psychological safety. You hear about this a lot, maybe you don't necessarily know what it means. So let's find out, right? So Amy Edmondson from Harvard Business School, this is basically what psychological safety is. It's a sense of confidence that your team will not embarrass, reject, or punish someone for speaking up. That's psychological safety, right? That I understand, I have confidence that if I speak up, if I bring something up within my group and within my team, they're not going to make me feel dumb. They're not going to make me embarrassed. They're not going to reject me and make me feel excluded. And also that I'm not going to be punished. And this is so important for so many reasons, right? Because the thing is, when people, I've said this before, if people are afraid of being punished for making mistakes, that is not going to make them make fewer mistakes. It makes them become subject matter experts in hiding their mistakes. And if people are in a situation where they feel like they have to hide their mistakes, it's because there is no or a low level of psychological safety. And when people feel that they need to hide their mistakes, you are well and truly screwed, because you have no idea what is going on in your environment anymore. So here's a couple things that you can do, that we can do. I shouldn't just say you. We can all do these things to help foster more psychological safety within a team. So the first one is approach conflict as a collaborator, not as an adversary. The point when within a group, if we are having a difference of some kind, it's not about me trying to win and prove myself right. And that's really hard, especially for me. I like to be right. We kind of all like to be right. So you want to reframe this to start thinking about how we're collaborating with the person that we maybe are having a conflict with. It's not about proving that I'm right. It's not about getting my way. It's taking a step back and understanding what we're trying to accomplish and say, hey, you know what? This person that I actually feel like I'm at loggerheads with, I need to remember that we're probably teammates. We actually want the same things. And even if we don't, we're supposed to. So how do I look at this person? And you want to reframe to start thinking about this as a collaborator. We're working together, right? This is not my enemy. This is not someone to win. We want to speak human to human. So this is at the end of the day, these are people, right? I can't believe how many times I've said at the end of the day, this is ridiculous. But the people that we're working with are other humans, and we want to interface with them as humans. They're not just the thing that I'm hearing. And a phrase that's great for this to do mentally is just like me, right? So if I'm having conflict with someone else or I'm talking to someone else, remember, this is someone who wants to be successful, just like me. This is someone who doesn't understand what happened in this incident, just like me. This is someone who is maybe a little uneasy about what's going on in the world around us right now, just like me. You don't necessarily have to say it out loud, but when you're trying to understand where someone else is coming from, use that mental phrase, just like me. That helps us think about this as a human to human interaction. This is another person just like me. Replacing blame with curiosity. Remember this, you don't have all the facts. You never do. Even when you think you do, you really don't. There's always something we don't know. There's the things we don't know. But so instead of having our approach to the interaction being about blame or fault, it's curiosity, because the more facts that we gather, the better we understand. So if we're pivoting to say, my point here is not to go find out why this happened, right? But how. John Allspaw, that we heard from before, he's got a great blog post called The Infinite Hows, and how questions are fantastic. So think about, but what the difference from switching between why and how is really about replacing blame with curiosity. I'm really interested to understand this because I'm curious. Also, that cat is adorable. And how can we do this? Well, we can modeling vulnerability. And we lead by example, whether you're the official leader of the team or not. Everybody, whether you're a manager or not, you can be a leader. And how do you lead? You lead by example. So creating emotional bonds. Does this mean that we have to do like funky team building exercises and have virtual happy hours and do all those things? Not necessarily. But on the other side, sometimes things that might seem a little silly, like icebreakers, getting to know your teammates makes them people, right? And then creating those emotional bonds. But another way is by being vulnerable, sharing things that you're uneasy about. And you start that in a non-stressful time, right? The time to model vulnerability is not when there's a lot of conflict, but maybe when everything is kind of going chill. That's a good time to kind of share some things about yourself. And that doesn't mean your coworkers have to know every single thing you did and you have to tell them about all the things you did over the weekend and all this stuff. And your coworkers don't need to know all your kids' names. There's actually a bunch of really interesting things happening around this in today's kind of now times with quarantining and everything, and a lot of people working at home that aren't used to it. We're starting to actually learn more about our teammates because they're kind of having to show the vulnerability of their home life. We're meeting each other's pets. Our coworkers' kids are running around behind them. We're seeing what their house looks like, maybe. And that's actually making people feel very vulnerable sometimes. But showing that vulnerability shows that it's okay. And if you are in any kind of a position of authority, it is incumbent upon you to do this even more, because that shows that it's all right. And what happens is people see this vulnerability and they see that it doesn't result in terrible things happening, right? It's like, hey, I told people my cat's name and it turns out they didn't make fun of me for the fact that my cat's name is Kubernetes. Maybe you should, but that's another story, right? So now let's think about when we've talked about wanting to replace blame with curiosity. And blamelessness is not just for postmortems. It's not just for that. It's always, we're always doing this kind of learning. So I want to be really clear about one thing here. I'm talking about facilitation. I'm not talking about investigation and analysis. So these are some tips about if you're helping run a meeting that you want to encourage blamelessness in. So these are not necessarily directly connected to incident analysis and the person doing that, but this is maybe someone who's trying to facilitate the meeting, whether it's related to a postmortem or just to a retrospective, to anything where you feel like there's potential risk for blame, right? So here's the thing. We talk about blameless a lot, and I'm going to turn it on its ear. So J. Paul Reed kind of has said, in his opinion, that removing blame is almost impossible because we have millions of years of evolutionary neurobiology and then thousands of years of social conditioning that wire us to use blame to give voice to these painful and uncomfortable feelings. So instead, we want to think, Paul will tell us, we want to think about being blame aware. So if we're aware of this tendency, we know it's something people want to do. First of all, don't blame people for blaming, because that's not only is it meta, it's also terrible. But if you blame people for blaming, I'm not blaming you. And I could do this all day. But if we're aware of it, there's things we want to think about, because our tendency, even if you have a great culture in your organization, even if everybody has watched all the talks and read all the blog posts and listened to all the podcasts, we still always want to go in this place. So it's really helpful to have someone actively thinking about helping facilitate this. So what's the role of a facilitator, right? So in a conversation, if you're helping facilitate, it's a specific role and it's different than a participant. So one thing is, one of the things to remember in the role of the facilitator is encouraging people to speak up and also making sure that everyone is heard. This can be a little tricky because some people are not comfortable. So going around and calling on people, they may have a reason they didn't speak up. But you want to be observant if there are folks who have been trying, whether through verbal or nonverbal signals, to get their word in edgewise and be able to facilitate and maybe say, hey, you know what, Joe? I think that Sally is trying to make a point here. Can we hear from her now? And one of the key indicators of a team with high psychological safety is that team members all tend to speak in roughly equal increments, in equal amounts. It's evenly distributed. You don't have this one person that's talking all the time. The facilitator helps clarify insights and can challenge the team with questions. Right. So when something is brought up, the facilitator can help repeat it, maybe clarify it if it seems unsure, and then also ask questions. Right. Ask follow-up questions. I like to think about being a facilitator. It's a little bit like being a podcast host. I have a little bit of experience in this. And one of the things I find is essential in my role as a podcast host is to be the audience proxy, to ask questions on behalf of the audience, even though I might know the answer. So as a facilitator, you can proxy other people in the room who may not feel comfortable asking the question. So questions you think people might have, even if you feel like you know the answer, you can bring those up. A facilitator also helps the team see different angles and different options. So as a facilitator, you can, again, it's different questions, but being able to say, hey, this doesn't quite sound like we're seeing this from all the different angles where it might happen. So being able to kind of ask those questions or ask things to be reframed. And then again, part of it is a little bit of housekeeping. So keeping everyone on time and on track. It's really easy to go off on tangents, and sometimes tangents are really interesting. And sometimes they help us discover things we didn't know otherwise. But keep an eye on where that's going. And really, again, keeping things on track and trying to keep people from dominating the entire meeting. Couple things to keep in mind about being a facilitator. The facilitator, if you're the facilitator, you're not there to make decisions, right? You're not the boss of the meeting. Also, try to not take sides. This is hard because you're still a human. You're not a facilitator bot, right? You're going to have opinions. You're going to have things, but really try to be as impartial as you can when it comes to that. And again, that being said, try to speak as little as possible. You may be surprised to hear that I don't like facilitating meetings because it means I don't get to talk a lot. So I'm a lot better in this kind of a role. But that's the thing, as a facilitator, you're not there to opine. You're there to help guide the meeting. And again, that means you're a shadow that's guiding the discussions. You're not a presenter who takes over the meeting. In so many ways, if you think about podcast hosts that you really like, you'll find they almost are like facilitators in the episode. And now let's talk finally about de-escalating conflict. When conflict arises, what do we want to do to help keep this from being adversarial, from being conflict is incredibly stressful. This is what gets us riled up into our fight or flight, right? And we have a physiological response to conflict that's hardwired into us from, again, all those eons of evolution, right? So how do we help diffuse it so that we can be productive and we can apply all these other ideas when we're collaborating? So Marshall Rosenberg, who created the idea of nonviolent conflict, has said this as, we do not look for compromise. Rather, we seek to resolve the conflict to everyone's complete satisfaction. I've told my kids before that a compromise is what happens when none of us are happy. That's not what we're trying to do. We're actually trying to resolve this and make sure everybody is happy. And believe it or not, that is possible. If that's the way we're approaching the problem and approaching the conflict, is to say, how can we resolve this and have everybody be completely satisfied? And being completely satisfied does not mean you get what you want or get what you asked for at first. But when we're done, we are completely satisfied with the resolution. Dave Shackelford has, I really like this idea too, from a de-escalation perspective, says, you can pause things with force. You can just say, hey, look, everybody, take a break, take a breath. And you can be really, really active in shutting things down when things get heated. But you really can't make meaningful progress until people feel heard. So when someone believes that their point of view has been understood and acknowledged, and that doesn't mean they've been agreed with, but they've been acknowledged, there is this like visceral response that happens. We want to be heard. So even though you may have to sometimes just say, hey, hang on, we got to take a step. I got a little wound up there. You want to make sure everyone has involved in a conflict has that opportunity to be heard and acknowledged. So when you think about, I referenced nonviolent communication before, and I'll post some links at the end of this, which you'll be able to find out a little bit more about these things. But when you look at the model of nonviolent communication, it breaks down to 4 things that kind of happen in this order. We start with observations. We move on to feelings. Then there are needs and there are requests. We're going to kind of talk about all of these, and you're going to see a little bit of a pattern when it comes to what makes this work. So when we think about observations, what does that mean? And it's what I observe. What do I see? What do I hear? What do I remember? Free from evaluations. So just the facts, right? The facts of observation. I'm not evaluating them. I'm not trying to understand them. I'm just saying, what is the data? What am I observing that does or does not contribute to my well-being? So, for example, when I see this happen, when I hear these words, but the flip side of that we want to understand, we want to think about that. And then what do you observe that does not contribute to your well-being? And this isn't necessarily me asking you this, because empathy may make this nonverbal and unsaid. But because I'm trying to be empathetic, I want to try to I want to try to observe the things that do or do not contribute to your well-being. And then when we think about feelings, right? So feelings are how I feel, an emotion or a sensation rather than thought in relation to what I observe. So it's like, I feel scared. I feel threatened. I feel angry. I feel prickly, right? Like, I mean, you kind of get that pins and needles thing. That's a feeling, right? Related to that observation that just came in. And then likewise, on the person that you're having the conflict with, how do they feel in relation to what you observe, right? So it's I feel and you feel. And you're not telling someone how they feel. You're wanting to understand that. And then the needs, right? So needs are, what do I need or value that causes my feelings, right? And this is not a preference. It's not even necessarily a specific action, right? It could be, I need you to let me finish my sentence, right? It's not even what I need. I need to be heard, right? I value because I value being acknowledged. And then likewise, what do they need or value? And then this comes all the way back down to request. This is when the actionable stuff happens, but you can't get here if you haven't led yourself up to it with the observations, the feelings, and the needs. So requests are clearly requesting that which would enrich my life without demanding. Notice the difference. It is a request. It is not a demand. It is not, Mike, Mike, do this. Mike, please do that. It is a request. I'm saying, I'm asking you to do this. And then likewise, I need to empathetically receive what would enrich your life without hearing it as a demand. And that's really hard, right? But if we're focusing on it and saying this is not a demand, it is a request. Even maybe if it's phrased as a demand, I'm going to receive it as a request. And these are basically requests are concrete actions that I would like taken. And again, it's a request. So it's, would you be willing to write this up? Would you be willing to rephrase that question and ask it slightly differently? And then I want the same thing, right? And again, I may need to kind of empathetically receive these. You may not be explicit with them, but what are the concrete actions you would like taken as well? So I may ask this and say, would you like this to happen? Or it may have to go unstated. Here's what it's all about, and it's an often quoted African proverb. But hey, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. I will have this deck available probably in a few minutes after we're done with Q&A. If you go to speaking.mattstratton.com, you'll be able to download that. I've got some supporting links, some more information about the resources that we've talked about in this. But at this point, I'd love to take any questions that you might have. And thank you for letting me virtually be part of your day or evening, depending on where you are.
Thanks, Matty. Okay, so we do have a couple of questions queued up here. One of them is, how do you return, I guess, the trust and psychological safety in a team after several conflicts?
How do you return to having it, I guess, is if you've had several conflicts?
Right.
Well, that's the thing. It's a continuum, right? And so this is not an end state that you've achieved psychological safety. We've done all the things. Now we're done. Tick the box, and it will never disappear. It's something we have to continue to work at. So I think the same steps and things that were important for trying to foster it when it doesn't originally exist. But part of that is also going to be about acknowledgement. So if you go back and you think about the nonviolent communication, we want to say, okay, what was the thing that happened? And doing it in a blame-free way, but we need to acknowledge it, right? And say, this was a thing that happened. It's not a thing that you did or a thing that you are. but we had this conflict and it did not resolve well. So, hey, you know, we can do retros and postmortems, not just about when our technical systems fail. So being able to continually look at that, and if you in a team where you feel like this has been going really well, and then it deviates, you kind of have to double down on it a little bit and make it a more important focus.
Gotcha. Then another question is, what? Let's see here. What should be changed first of all in a team with low psychological safety?
I think one of the most powerful ones to start with is someone in a leadership role modeling vulnerability. That's very, very effective. It's also important to agree as a team that this is something that is important to you. A lot of team, especially if it's a team that is not ad hoc, having some type of a charter that says we believe this to be important, and we're going to continue to talk about it. So I think the very first thing is to agree that you want to make it happen, and come to and have everybody be on board with that, or at least as many people as possible.
Right. So then we have another one that says here, how do you foster productivity friction?
How do you foster productivity friction? I'm not 100% sure I know what productivity friction is. I also, not knowing it, fostering it seems like a thing you wouldn't want. I do think that one of the key things, and we don't have the time to go into this, but going back to State of DevOps report, productivity is a very interesting measure, and we usually measure it incorrectly, right? So I don't really know the question. Hey, pop into, if you're in the Slack after I'm done here, give me a little bit more framing on what you're talking about, and I'm happy to help with that. And then today I learned a thing, or I'm about to learn a thing.
And then one last question is, do you have any tips to, let's see, for me to get other team members to engage in a meeting?
So that's a really hard one because people have different preferences, right? So sometimes if people aren't speaking up and they're not engaging, it's because they're just not necessarily comfortable with that, and calling on them is really hard. So you need to use a little bit of your judgment. Sometimes it is a matter of reinforcing the behavior that you want as well, because even people that don't contribute a lot will contribute sometimes. And when they do, I don't want to say something. You don't have to be like, oh, yay, Mike said something. Yay, let's have do a lot of Slack emojis or whatever.
Hurrah.
But recognize it. Sometimes all it takes is just saying, wow, that's a really good point. Like those are easy to do, and they make a huge difference. And we all think, so I just told you that, and everybody just was like, oh, that wouldn't work on me. I would see right through that. And you know what? You're all liars. It would 100% work, and you wouldn't even know it was happening. So little things like that, because it's easier to reinforce positive the behavior that you want than it is to, but it has to happen. And so you have to really have your eyes open for it.
Gotcha. Well, thank you very much, Maddie.
Yeah, my pleasure.
And I'm sure there are going to be other questions over there in the forum. And let me go ahead and let you go and bring on the next speaker. Have a good one.
You too. Thanks, Mike.